Welcome to the November IASB podcast, where we bring you the latest insights from our recent IASB meeting. I am Nili Shah, Executive Technical Director of the IASB. And in this episode, I am joined by Andreas Barckow, Chair of the IASB, and Bertrand Perrin, one of our IASB members. Welcome, Andreas and Bertrand.
Welcome, Nili.
Welcome, Nili.
Thank you. So we just finished the November 2025 board meeting, where we continued our redeliberations on the equity method project, and we discussed our work plan. And in this episode, we'll discuss both of these topics. So let's start with the equity method project. Andreas, can you remind our listeners about this project and its objectives?
Certainly, Nili. This project aims to reduce diversity in practice by answering application questions and to improve the understandability of IAS 28 investments in associates and joint ventures. Key areas include clarifying how to measure the cost of the associate or joint venture when the investor obtains significant influence, how to account for changes in ownership, and how to recognize gains or losses from transactions with associates and joint ventures. In September 2024, we published the exposure draft, proposing amendments to IAS 28 to address application questions and introduce new disclosure requirements. We received over 100 comment letters and participated in dozens of outreach events. We truly appreciate all the time and thoughtful feedback you share with us. Since the comment period closed, we have been redeliberating the proposals in the exposure draft, taking into consideration the feedback we received from stakeholders.
Thanks, Andreas. So at the November meeting, the board discussed three key topics related to the equity method. Bertrand, can you tell us about the first topic we discussed, the measurement of the cost of an associate?
Yes, Nili. We discussed how to measure the cost of an associate when obtaining significant influence, and the recognition and measurement of contingent consideration, both when obtaining significant influence and when purchasing additional ownership interests. The IASB considered feedback on our proposals in the exposure draft and decided to proceed with these proposals. This means that when an investor obtains significant influence, it would measure the cost of the associate at the fair value of the consideration transferred, including the fair value of any previously held interest in the associate. For contingent consideration, the IASB decided that investors should recognize it as part of the consideration transferred and measure it at fair value initially. Contingent consideration classified as an equity instrument would not be remeasured, while other contingent consideration would be measured at fair value at each reporting date with changes recognized in profit or loss.
Okay, so that was the first topic. Moving on to the second topic, Bertrand, can you tell us more about the board's discussions on purchases of additional ownership interests?
Sure, Nili. We discussed how an investor should apply the equity method when purchasing an additional interest in an associate, while the investor retains significant influence. Again, the board decided to proceed with the proposals in the exposure draft. Under these requirements, when an investor purchases additional shares, they would measure any difference between the fair value of the consideration transferred and the fair value of the additional share of the associate's identifiable assets and liabilities. However, we recognize stakeholder concerns about cost and complexity of determining the fair values at the date of each purchase, so the board is exploring introducing reliefs from applying these proposals.
And what are these reliefs, Bertrand?
First, we decided to extend the measurement period requirement from IFRS 3 business combinations to situations where an investor obtains significant influence over an associate or purchases an additional ownership interest in the associate. This would allow investors up to 1 year to finalize the measurements of the associate's identifiable assets and liabilities, similar to business combinations. Second, we had a long discussion about how to provide investors with relief from measuring the additional share of the associate's identifiable assets and liabilities at fair value. We instructed the staff to perform more work and come back with a recommendation at a future meeting. This relief should be particularly aimed at investors that conduct frequent purchases of additional ownership interests.
Okay, thank you. So that was the second topic that the board discussed on the equity method project. And let's move on to the third and final topic, Bertrand, which was disposals of a portion of an investment in an associate. Can you tell us more about that?
Certainly. This topic focused on how an investor should account for the disposal of a portion of its interest in an associate while retaining significant influence, particularly how to measure the disposed portion. After considering the feedback, which was generally supportive, the board decided to proceed with the proposals in the exposure draft. This means an investor would measure the disposed portion as a percentage of the carrying amount of the investment. That percentage is calculated as the disposed ownership interest divided by the total ownership interest. The investor would then recognize the difference between the consideration received and the portion derecognized as a gain or loss in profit or loss.
Okay, thanks, Bertrand. And as next steps for our listeners, just to let you know that the IASB will continue redeliberating the proposals in the exposure draft and decide the project direction in the first quarter of 2026. So now let's turn to the second topic that we discussed in November, which was about our work plan. Andreas, can you provide some background on this?
Absolutely. As listeners may recall, in September 2025, we decided to undertake a concurrent agenda consultation with our sister board, the IASB. This is meant to help our stakeholders more efficiently respond to our consultation by enabling them to consider the work of both boards at the same time. This concurrent agenda consultation is expected to start in late 2026, with a request for information to be published in 2027, and the consultation is expected to conclude in 2028. In the meantime, we continue to progress our existing projects, including improvements to the statement of cash flows and the accounting for intangible assets, both of which we started last year. We are also nearing completion of some of our other projects on our work plan. This means that we might have capacity to address some, but not all, stakeholder demands for new projects. At the November meeting, we discussed a process for using any capacity that becomes available in the period before the conclusion of the concurrent agenda consultation.
Thanks, Andreas. And Bertrand, can you share some more details about what the IASB discussed in November?
Sure. In the meeting, we observed that we have capacity needs for time-sensitive matters, post-implementation reviews, existing projects that might require additional resources depending on the stage of the project, and maintenance and consistent application work. So we noted that we would only add a new project if capacity remains available after considering the needs on those priorities. We also decided to identify a list of potential topics that we could consider addressing as capacity becomes available. Although we did not add any new projects at the November meeting, we thought it would be helpful to signal that we are thinking about, as some of our stakeholders do research that can inform our future work.
Okay, so Andreas, what is on this list of possible future projects?
So we have 4 topics that we could potentially consider addressing when capacity becomes available. These are operating segments, pollutant pricing mechanisms, hyperinflationary accounting, and crypto assets. These topics were selected considering our reserve list from 2022, which was based on feedback from our last agenda consultation, as well as emerging topics identified through our horizon scanning activities. At the meeting, we discussed possible scopes for these topics if we were to start a project. There are different ways we could approach some of these topics, but we will discuss further when the IASB makes decisions about adding a new project to its work plan. It's important to note that we will only add a project if and when appropriate capacity becomes available, as Bertrand has just said. There is no guarantee that all these potential topics will be added as projects to our work plan during the interim period. The topics that are not added to the work plan before the concurrent agenda consultation will be considered as part of that consultation.
Thanks, Andreas. And Bertrand, what are the next steps for our work plan?
We will continue to monitor developments and our capacity. The board will decide which project to start from the list shortly before capacity becomes available. We will make these decisions about adding a new project using our prioritization framework, ensuring we maintain the right balance of activities across our work plan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andreas and Bertrand. And that concludes this episode of our IASB podcast. But before we sign off, I would like to say a personal farewell. After 8 amazing years at the IFRS Foundation, my time has come to an end. This is my final podcast, and I'd like to thank all of you for listening over the years. I hope you have found these podcasts informative. And I'd also like to thank the many staff behind the scenes who work to bring you these podcasts every month, especially Elena Kostina and Aslam Arslan, who spearhead the content development for these podcasts, our other technical staff who provide comments, Mani Pillay and Juliet Pitt from our communications team, and Isaiah Edwards from our audiovisual team. Although I am saying goodbye, do join us next month as we will continue the tradition of bringing you updates on our work with a special end-of-year episode with Chair Andreas Barckow and Vice Chair Linda Mizan-Hutter. Until next time, goodbye from all of us at the IASB.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please take the time to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast player. Please contact us on communications@ifrs.org with any questions, comments, or suggestions. You can also sign up for email alerts on our website, ifrs.org, or find us on social media.